In the quiet suburbs of Maplewood Springs, where single fathers juggle impossible schedules and dreams fade like morning mist, Ryan Miller's world is about to shatter. His 6-month-old daughter Emma lies motionless in her crib, her tiny chest still as stone. The babysitter's panicked screams echo through their small apartment as Ryan's trembling fingers dial 911, but in his terror, he misdials. The voice that answers isn't emergency dispatch. It's Dr. Sophia Chen, a renowned cardiac surgeon heading home after a grueling 18-hour shift at Riverside Medical Center. When Ryan's desperate cry pierces through her exhaustion, "Please, my baby's not breathing," she faces an impossible choice: hang up and direct him to 911, or attempt something that defies every protocol she's ever learned. The town knows Dr. Chen as the brilliant surgeon who can repair the most complex hearts with steady hands and unwavering precision. But few know she carries a secret burden: the memory of her own infant sister, lost to a similar emergency 20 years ago when help came too late. Could a heart surgeon, working through nothing but a phone line and sheer determination, really guide a terrified father through saving his daughter's life? Before we dive into this incredible true story, tell us where you're watching from, and if this touches your heart, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I have something extraordinary waiting for you. Ryan Miller had never imagined his life would look like this. At 28, he'd pictured himself climbing corporate ladders, maybe married to his college sweetheart Jessica, living in one of those picture-perfect homes with white picket fences that dotted the nicer parts of Maplewood Springs. Instead, he found himself in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment on Elm Street, surrounded by baby bottles, sleepless nights, and the constant weight of raising Emma alone. Jessica had left when Emma was just 2 months old. "I'm not ready for this," she'd said, her designer suitcase already packed by the door. "I thought I wanted a family, but I can't handle the crying, the sleepless nights, the responsibility. I'm sorry, Ryan, but I need to find myself." Those words still echoed in Ryan's mind during the darkest moments of single parenthood. He'd quit his promising job at Henderson Marketing to work remotely as a freelance graphic designer, the pay inconsistent, but the flexibility necessary. Mrs. Patterson, his elderly neighbor, helped watch Emma during client meetings, but most days it was just Ryan and his daughter against the world. Emma had been his miracle from the moment she was born: bright eyes that seemed to take in everything, tiny fingers that gripped his thumb with surprising strength, and a smile that could melt away the exhaustion of another sleepless night. She was his purpose, his reason for pushing through the financial stress, the isolation, and the overwhelming responsibility of solo parenting. That Tuesday evening in October started like any other. Ryan had been working late on a logo design for Brennan's hardware store, trying to meet the deadline while Emma napped in her crib. Mrs. Patterson had agreed to listen for her while Ryan finished the project in his home office. The autumn wind rattled the windows of their 3rd-floor apartment, and the old radiator clanked its familiar rhythm. "Ryan!" Mrs. Patterson's voice cut through the quiet like a blade. "Ryan, come quick!" He'd never heard that tone in her voice before, raw panic that made his blood freeze. Ryan dropped his computer mouse and sprinted to Emma's nursery, where Mrs. Patterson stood frozen beside the crib, her arthritic hands pressed to her mouth in horror. Emma lay completely still. Her usually rosy cheeks had turned an alarming shade of blue, and her tiny chest wasn't moving. The sight hit Ryan like a physical blow, stealing his breath and making his knees nearly buckle. "She was sleeping so peacefully," Mrs. Patterson whispered, tears streaming down her weathered face. "I checked on her 20 minutes ago, and she was fine. I don't understand what happened." Ryan's hands shook as he reached for Emma, her small body frighteningly limp and cold. "Call 911, he shouted, his voice cracking with terror. "Call 911 now." But Mrs. Patterson's arthritis had gotten worse lately, and her fingers fumbled with her old flip phone. "I can't. The buttons are too small. I can't see." Ryan grabbed his smartphone from the nightstand, his vision blurring with tears and panic. Emma, his beautiful, perfect Emma, couldn't be gone. This couldn't be happening, not to his little girl, not when she was his entire world. His fingers, slick with sweat and trembling uncontrollably, stabbed at the screen. In his terror, muscle memory failed him. Instead of dialing 911, his shaking thumb hit the wrong numbers entirely. The phone rang once, twice, and then a tired but professional voice answered. "Dr. Chen speaking." "Please," Ryan's voice broke completely. My baby's not breathing. She's not breathing and I don't know what to do. Please help me." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Dr. Sophia Chen had been driving home from Riverside Medical Center after performing 3 emergency cardiac surgeries in a row. Her BMW was stopped at a red light on Oakwood Avenue, just 5 miles from Ryan's apartment, though neither of them knew it yet. She was exhausted, emotionally drained, and looking forward to nothing more than a hot shower and 8 hours of sleep. But the desperation in Ryan's voice cut through her fatigue like a scalpel. "Sir, I think you've reached the wrong number," Dr. Chen said gently, her medical training keeping her voice calm even as her heart rate increased. "You need to hang up and dial 911 immediately." "I can't," Ryan sobbed. "I tried, but my phone. I don't know what's wrong. Please don't hang up. She's so blue and she's not moving, and I can't lose her. She's all I have." Dr. Chen sat in her car, the traffic light turning green above her, faced with an impossible decision. Protocol demanded she end the call and direct him to emergency services. But something in Ryan's voice, the raw, primal terror of a parent watching their child slip away, triggered a memory she'd spent 20 years trying to suppress. Her sister Lily had been only 8 months old when it happened. Their parents had been out for their anniversary dinner, leaving Sophia, then 16, to babysit. She'd found Lily blue and unresponsive in her crib, had called 911, had followed every instruction perfectly. But the ambulance had gotten stuck in traffic, and by the time they arrived, it was too late. The guilt had shaped every moment of Sophia's life since then, driving her to become one of the most skilled cardiac surgeons on the West Coast. She'd saved thousands of lives, but she'd never been able to save the one that mattered most. Now, 20 years later, another father was facing the same nightmare she'd lived through. The traffic light turned red again, and Dr. Chen made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "Listen to me very carefully," she said, pulling her BMW over to the shoulder of Oakwood Avenue. "I'm a doctor, and I'm going to help you save your daughter, but I need you to do exactly what I tell you, exactly when I tell you. Can you do that for me?" Ryan's sobs quieted to desperate breathing. "Yes, yes, please, anything." "What's your name?" "Ryan Miller, and this is Emma, my daughter Emma." "Okay, Ryan, I'm Dr. Chen, and we're going to bring Emma back together." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Ryan Miller's hands shook as he cradled Emma's lifeless form, the phone pressed against his ear like a lifeline. 3 months ago, this same nursery had been filled with Emma's delighted giggles as he assembled her crib, Jessica beside him painting the walls a soft lavender. Now those walls seemed to close in around him as he faced every parent's worst nightmare alone. The journey to this moment had been one disaster after another. When Jessica walked out 2 months after Emma's birth, she'd taken more than just her belongings. She'd taken Ryan's confidence, his support system, and half their savings. "I can't do this anymore, Ryan," she'd said, not even looking at Emma sleeping peacefully in her carrier. "The crying, the responsibility, the way my whole life just disappeared. I thought I wanted to be a mother, but I was wrong." Ryan had begged her to stay, to try counseling, to give their little family a chance, but Jessica's mind was made up. She'd already accepted a job transfer to Seattle, already signed a lease on a studio apartment, already erased them from her future plans. The divorce papers arrived 3 weeks later, along with her complete relinquishment of parental rights. "I'm not cut out for this," her final text message had read. "You'll be better off without me dragging you both down." Better off. Ryan almost laughed bitterly at the memory as he looked at Emma's blue lips. Better off working 16-hour days to cover rent and childcare. Better off heating formula at 3 a.m. while trying to finish client projects on his laptop. Better off explaining to his daughter's pediatrician, Dr. Martinez, why he'd missed 2 appointments. Because clients needed last-minute changes. Money had become a constant source of anxiety. His freelance graphic design work was unpredictable. Some months brought in enough to cover expenses, others left him choosing between groceries and Emma's formula. He'd applied for food assistance, childcare subsidies, anything that might help, but the bureaucracy moved slower than his empty refrigerator. Mrs. Patterson had been a godsend, refusing payment for watching Emma during client meetings. "Nonsense, dear," she'd say in her gentle Irish accent, arthritis-gnarled hands surprisingly steady as she held the baby. I raised 5 of my own. One more little angel is a blessing, not a burden. But even Mrs. Patterson couldn't be available 24/7. And Ryan often found himself taking client calls while bouncing a crying Emma, trying to sound professional while his world crumbled around him. The sleepless nights had become his new normal. Emma was a good baby during the day, but evenings brought colic that lasted for hours. Ryan would walk the small apartment's perimeter, bouncing her gently, singing off-key lullabies he half remembered from his own childhood. Some nights, exhaustion would overwhelm him, and he'd sit on the floor of the nursery crying alongside his daughter, feeling like the most inadequate father in the world. His family lived 3 states away in Colorado, and his parents, though loving, were struggling with his father's recent heart attack and couldn't travel. His mother called daily, offering advice over the phone, but long-distance parenting tips couldn't replace the village Ryan desperately needed. "Honey, you're doing the best you can," his mother would say during their evening calls. "Single parenting is the hardest job in the world, but Emma is lucky to have a father who loves her so much." But love wasn't paying the bills or providing the stability Emma deserved. Ryan had started taking on projects that barely covered expenses, working with demanding clients who seemed to think freelancers were available around the clock. Just last week, he'd stayed up until 4 a.m. redesigning a restaurant's menu while Emma slept fitfully in her bouncer beside his desk. The pediatric appointments had become increasingly stressful. Dr. Martinez was kind, but thorough, asking questions about Emma's development that highlighted Ryan's inexperience. Was she meeting her milestones? How many words was she babbling? Was her sleep schedule consistent? Ryan did his best to answer, but every question felt like a test he wasn't prepared for. "Single parenting is challenging," Dr. Martinez had said during their last visit, her tone professionally neutral but her eyes kind. "Don't hesitate to reach out if you need resources. There are support groups, parenting classes, assistance programs." But Ryan's pride had prevented him from seeking help beyond the basic necessities. He'd grown up believing that real men handled their responsibilities without complaint, that asking for help was admitting failure. Now holding Emma's motionless body, that pride felt like the most dangerous luxury he'd ever indulged. The apartment itself told the story of their struggle. The living room doubled as his office, with client files stacked on every surface, and his computer setup competing for space with Emma's bouncer and playmat. The kitchen sink perpetually held a tower of bottles waiting to be sterilized, and the laundry basket overflowed with tiny clothes that somehow multiplied faster than he could wash them. Ryan's social life had completely disappeared. Friends his age were out enjoying their careers, traveling, building relationships. His Instagram feed was filled with their restaurant photos and weekend adventures, while his phone's camera roll contained nothing but pictures of Emma, sleeping Emma, smiling Emma, Emma reaching for toys, Emma covered in pureed carrots. She had become his entire world, which made this moment even more terrifying. He'd read every parenting book he could find at the Maplewood Springs Public Library, staying up late absorbing information about infant development, feeding schedules, and sleep training. But no book had prepared him for this moment, for the absolute helplessness of watching his daughter slip away while feeling completely powerless to save her. The babysitting arrangements were always precarious. Mrs. Patterson was wonderful but in her 70s, and Ryan worried about putting too much responsibility on her fragile shoulders. The daycare centers were either too expensive or had waiting lists months long. Most evenings, Ryan worked after Emma went to bed, surviving on coffee and determination, praying she'd sleep through the night so he could meet his deadlines. Now, as he waited for Dr. Chen's instructions, Ryan thought about all the moments he might have missed. Emma's first real smile, her attempts to roll over, the way she'd recently started reaching for his face when he picked her up from her crib. Had he been so focused on survival that he'd missed truly living with his daughter? "Dr. Chen," he whispered into the phone, his voice barely audible. "She's still not breathing. What do I do? I can't lose her. She's all I have left." The weight of single parenthood, the financial stress, the isolation, and the overwhelming responsibility all crashed down on him in that moment. But underneath the panic and desperation, a fierce determination burned. He'd already lost Jessica. He'd already sacrificed his career, his social life, his independence. He wasn't going to lose Emma, too. Whatever Dr. Chen told him to do, he would do it. However impossible it seemed, however scared he was, he would find a way to save his daughter's life. Because being Emma's father wasn't just what he did, it was who he was. And fathers didn't give up on their children, no matter how dark the moment became. Dr. Sophia Chen sat in her silver BMW on the shoulder of Oakwood Avenue, her hands gripping the steering wheel as she processed the desperate voice on the other end of the line. 20 minutes earlier, she'd been scrubbing out of her third emergency surgery of the day, exhausted down to her bones and dreaming of nothing more than her empty apartment and 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep. At 34, Dr. Chen had built a reputation as one of the most skilled cardiac surgeons at Riverside Medical Center, but that reputation had come at a cost. Her colleagues knew her as brilliant but distant, technically gifted but emotionally guarded. She arrived first, left last, and rarely socialized with the other doctors. Her apartment on Highland Drive reflected this isolation, immaculate, minimalist, and as sterile as an operating room. The truth was, Sophia had designed her life to avoid exactly this kind of moment. She saved lives in controlled environments, surrounded by trained teams with every variable monitored and managed. She didn't do house calls, didn't provide phone consultations, and certainly didn't guide panicked fathers through emergency procedures from the side of a road. But Ryan's voice had shattered her carefully constructed barriers, dragging her back to a humid August night 18 years ago when she was just 16 years old. Her parents, David and Lynn Chen, had been celebrating their 20th wedding anniversary at the Grandview restaurant downtown. "Just 3 hours, Sophia," her mother had said, adjusting her pearl earrings in the hallway mirror. "Lily will probably sleep the whole time. Emergency numbers are on the refrigerator." Sophia had been confident, almost cocky. She was the straight-A student, the responsible older sister, the one everyone could count on. She'd babysat for neighbors before, earned her CPR certification through the high school health class, and had already been accepted to pre-med programs at 3 universities. Zero. But when she'd found 8-month-old Lily blue and lifeless in her crib that night, all her confidence had evaporated. She'd called 911 immediately, followed every instruction perfectly, performed infant CPR exactly as she'd been taught. But the ambulance had gotten stuck behind a 3-car accident on Miller Boulevard, precious minutes ticking away while Sophia worked frantically over her sister's tiny body. By the time paramedics arrived, it was too late. Lily was gone, and with her went the close-knit family Sophia had always taken for granted. Her parents never said it was her fault. They'd held her at the funeral, assured her she'd done everything right, reminded her that sometimes terrible things happened despite everyone's best efforts. But Sophia had seen something die in their eyes that night. Not just grief for Lily, but the end of their ability to be carefree, trusting parents. The family had moved to Oregon 6 months later, her father taking a job transfer he'd previously declined. "Fresh start," her mother had said, but they all knew they were running from the ghost of what if. What if Sophia had checked on Lily sooner? What if she'd called 911 30 seconds earlier? What if they'd never gone out that night? The questions had followed Sophia through college, medical school, and her surgical residency. Every life she saved in the operating room was an offering to Lily's memory, every successful surgery a desperate attempt to balance the cosmic scales. She'd become obsessed with precision, with controlling every variable, with never again being in a situation where someone's life depended on her quick thinking rather than her surgical skill. Her personal life had suffered accordingly. She'd broken up with Michael, her college boyfriend, when he'd started talking about marriage and children. "I can't risk it," she'd told him, though she'd never explained what it was. She'd turned down social invitations, avoided forming close friendships, and built walls so high that even her colleagues found her intimidating. Dr. Patricia Williamson, the chief of cardiothoracic surgery, had pulled her aside last month after a particularly successful triple bypass. "Sophia, you're one of the most gifted surgeons I've ever worked with," she'd said, "but you can't save everyone. At some point, you need to forgive yourself for whatever happened in your past." But forgiveness felt like betrayal. If she stopped carrying Lily's death as a burden, who would remember her sister's laugh, her tiny hands reaching for Sophia's face, the way she'd giggled during peekaboo games? Now, sitting in her car with Ryan's desperate pleas filling the quiet evening air, Sophia realized that all her years of controlled surgical environments hadn't prepared her for this moment. She had no monitors, no team, no sterile field. Just her knowledge, her voice, and a terrified father who'd accidentally called the one person in Maplewood Springs who understood exactly what he was going through. "Dr. Chen?" Ryan's voice cracked through the phone. "Are you still there? Please don't hang up." Sophia closed her eyes, seeing Lily's face as clearly as if 18 years were 18 seconds. Her sister would be 19 now, maybe in college, maybe calling Sophia for advice about boys or career choices. Instead, she existed only in Sophia's memories and in the driving need to prevent other families from experiencing the same devastating loss. "I'm here, Ryan," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I need to ask you some questions, and I need you to stay calm while you answer them. Can you do that for me?" "Yes, anything. Just please help me save her." Sophia's hands were shaking now, but her medical training began to override her personal fears. She'd spent 18 years preparing for this moment, even though she'd never known it. Every textbook she'd memorized, every procedure she'd perfected, every late night in the cardiac ICU had led to this phone call. "Ryan, I want you to look at Emma very carefully. Is there any color in her lips at all, even the faintest pink?" She heard him moving, his breathing ragged with panic. I think maybe a tiny bit. It's hard to tell with the lighting." That was something. Not much, but something. Sophia's mind began working through possibilities, differential diagnoses, treatment protocols. But this wasn't a sterile operating room with a full surgical team. This was a panicked father, an elderly neighbor, and a baby whose life hung in the balance. "Okay, that's good news. Now I need you to tell me exactly what happened before you found her like this. Was she sleeping normally? Any signs of illness? Fever, congestion, unusual fussiness?" As Ryan described Emma's normal evening routine, Sophia found herself making mental notes, building a clinical picture from fragments of information. It was like performing surgery through a keyhole, trying to save a life with incomplete information and no direct access to the patient. But she'd done impossible things before. She'd restarted hearts that had been stopped for minutes, repaired arteries no one thought could be fixed, given families back their loved ones when all hope seemed lost. This was different, scarier in some ways because it was so far outside her comfort zone, but the fundamental principle remained the same. Someone needed her help, and she wasn't going to let them down. Not again. "Ryan," she said, pulling her car back onto Oakwood Avenue and making a U-turn toward Maplewood Springs General Hospital. "I'm going to talk you through this step by step. But first, I need you to know that I believe Emma can come back to us. Do you believe that too?" "I have to," Ryan whispered. "She's all I have." Sophia understood that feeling better than he could possibly know. Sometimes the people who needed saving weren't just the patients. Sometimes they were the ones trying to save them. As Dr. Chen's BMW navigated the familiar streets of Maplewood Springs, her mind raced through protocols she'd never imagined using outside a hospital setting. But what Ryan didn't know, what none of her colleagues at Riverside Medical Center knew, was that Sophia's expertise extended far beyond adult cardiac surgery. During her residency at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, she'd spent 18 months in pediatric cardiac intensive care, specifically because she couldn't bear the thought of another family losing a child the way hers had lost Lily. Those had been the most emotionally grueling months of her medical career, but also the most important. She'd learned to read the subtle signs that differentiated between different types of pediatric emergencies, mastered the delicate art of infant resuscitation, and developed an almost supernatural ability to assess critical situations in children. Dr. Margaret Torres, her attending physician during that rotation, had pulled her aside after a particularly difficult case. "Sophia, you have something I rarely see in residents," she'd said. "You can see what others miss in pediatric emergencies. It's like you understand children's physiology on an instinctive level." But Sophia had never told Dr. Torres why she possessed that instinct. Every technique she mastered, every protocol she memorized, every successful resuscitation was driven by the same haunting question: could this knowledge have saved Lily? The truth was, Sophia had become one of the most quietly accomplished pediatric emergency specialists on the East Coast before switching to adult cardiac surgery. She'd published research on infant cardiac arrest, developed new approaches to neonatal resuscitation, and consulted on cases that stumped other specialists. But the emotional toll had been devastating. Every successful save reminded her of her failure with Lily. Every time she couldn't save a child, the guilt compounded exponentially. Finally, she'd made the switch to adult cardiac surgery, telling herself it was for career advancement, but knowing deep down it was because she couldn't handle losing another child on her watch. Now, listening to Ryan's panicked breathing through the phone, all that suppressed expertise was flooding back. The muscle memory of pediatric assessments, the instinctive understanding of infant physiology, the hard-won knowledge of how to guide untrained people through life-saving procedures. "Ryan, I need you to listen very carefully," Sophia said, pulling into the parking lot of Maplewood Springs Elementary School to focus completely on the call. "What I'm about to tell you might sound strange, but I want you to know that I've helped save dozens of babies in situations similar to Emma's." She'd never admitted that to anyone before. Her colleagues at Riverside knew her as exclusively an adult cardiac surgeon. Her parents thought she'd moved away from pediatrics because it was too competitive. Even she had convinced herself that her pediatric training was ancient history. "Before I specialized in adult heart surgery, I spent years working with infants and children in critical care," she continued, watching the last light fade from the October sky. "I've talked parents through emergency procedures before, and I've seen babies recover from situations that looked hopeless." What she didn't tell Ryan was that her pediatric training hadn't been standard. After Lily's death, Sophia had sought out the most challenging rotations, the most difficult cases, the situations other residents avoided. She'd volunteered for night shifts in the pediatric emergency department, spent her free time observing in the neonatal intensive care unit, and pushed herself to understand every possible scenario that could threaten a child's life. Dr. Jennifer Kim, the head of pediatric emergency medicine at Children's Hospital, had been both impressed and concerned by Sophia's intensity. "You're brilliant, Chen, but you're also obsessed," she'd said during one of their monthly evaluations. "You study pediatric emergencies like you're trying to solve a personal mystery." Dr. Kim had been more right than she knew. Sophia wasn't just learning medicine. She was conducting an 18-year investigation into whether Lily's death could have been prevented. Every case study she read, every procedure she mastered, every successful resuscitation was a piece of evidence in that investigation. The answer she'd eventually reached was both comforting and devastating. She'd done everything right that night with Lily. The delay hadn't been her fault. The outcome hadn't been preventable, and no amount of additional knowledge would have changed the result. But by the time she'd reached that conclusion, she'd become one of the most knowledgeable pediatric emergency specialists in the country. "Dr. Chen?" Ryan's voice brought her back to the present. "Emma's color looks a little better, but she's still not breathing on her own. What does that mean?" Sophia's trained ear caught something in Ryan's voice. A slight decrease in panic, a microscopic increase in hope. That was crucial. Panicked parents made mistakes, but parents with just enough hope could follow complex instructions with remarkable precision. "That's excellent news, Ryan. It means Emma's heart is still working, still circulating blood. What we're dealing with is likely a respiratory issue, not cardiac arrest. That gives us much more to work with." She'd seen this pattern before, during her pediatric rotation. Infants who appeared lifeless but retained some circulation often had obstructed airways or suppressed breathing reflexes rather than complete cardiac failure. These cases looked terrifying to untrained observers, but were often more treatable than they appeared. "I'm going to teach you a technique that paramedics use for infant respiratory emergencies," Sophia continued, her voice growing more confident as her medical training took over. "It's something I learned from working with emergency responders in Philadelphia. Are you ready to learn?" The technique she was thinking of wasn't something most cardiac surgeons would know. It was specialized knowledge from her pediatric emergency rotation, developed specifically for situations where professional help wasn't immediately available. She'd learned it from veteran paramedics who'd spent decades responding to exactly these kinds of calls. "Yes, please, anything," Ryan replied, and Sophia could hear him moving, could picture him positioning himself to follow her instructions. But before she could guide him through the procedure, she needed to make an assessment that would determine everything that happened next. Using only Ryan's descriptions and the sounds she could hear through the phone, she had to determine whether Emma was experiencing a simple breathing obstruction, a more serious respiratory depression, or something else entirely. "Ryan, I need you to put your ear very close to Emma's mouth and nose. Don't touch her yet, just listen. Can you hear any sound at all?" even the faintest whisper of air movement? As Ryan followed her instructions, Sophia closed her eyes and drew on every piece of knowledge she'd gained during those 18 months in pediatric intensive care. She was about to attempt something she'd never done before: diagnose and treat a pediatric emergency entirely through remote guidance, using skills she'd spent years trying to forget. But those skills were exactly what Emma needed now. And maybe, Sophia thought as she waited for Ryan's assessment, this was why she'd survived that night 18 years ago when Lily hadn't. Maybe this phone call was the reason she'd pushed herself through all those difficult pediatric rotations, all those sleepless nights studying infant emergency procedures. Maybe Lily's death hadn't been meaningless if it had prepared Sophia to save Emma's life. The screech of tires outside Ryan's apartment building announced the arrival of the Maplewood Springs Emergency Medical Services ambulance. Ryan's frantic call to his neighbor Marcus had brought unexpected consequences. Marcus had called 911 after hearing the commotion through the thin walls, and now paramedics were racing up the 3 flights of stairs to apartment 3B. "I hear sirens," Dr. Chen said through the phone, her voice carrying a note of concern. "Ryan, if paramedics are arriving, that's good news, but don't hang up on me yet. Let me talk to them about what we've been doing." The apartment door burst open without ceremony. Lead paramedic Jake Morrison strode in with the confidence of someone who'd handled thousands of emergency calls over his 15-year career. Behind him, his partner Sarah Valdez wheeled in their equipment, both of them moving with the efficient urgency that came from years of practice. Morrison took in the scene with a single glance: Ryan clutching his motionless daughter, Mrs. Patterson weeping in the corner, and the unmistakable chaos of a pediatric emergency. But what caught his attention was the phone pressed against Ryan's ear. "Sir, I need you to put down the phone and step away from the child," Morrison commanded, his voice carrying the authority of professional training. "We'll take over from here." "No, wait," Ryan said desperately, looking between Morrison and his phone. "Dr. Chen is helping us. She's been guiding me through." "Dr. Chen?" Morrison interrupted, his eyebrows rising skeptically. "Sir, are you telling me you've been taking medical advice over the phone from someone claiming to be a doctor during a pediatric emergency?" Sarah Valdez was already moving toward Emma with her equipment, but she paused when she heard the conversation. "Jake, if there's someone on the phone giving instructions, we need to know what they've been telling him to do." Morrison's expression hardened. In his experience, well-meaning but unqualified people giving medical advice over the phone usually made emergencies worse, not better. He'd seen parents follow internet instructions that endangered their children, had dealt with the aftermath of helpful neighbors who thought they knew better than trained professionals. "Sir, I don't know who you've been talking to, but I can guarantee you they're not qualified to handle this situation," Morrison said firmly. "Phone consultations aren't appropriate for pediatric emergencies. We need you to hang up so we can do our job." Through the phone speaker, Dr. Chen could hear every word of Morrison's dismissal. She recognized the tone immediately. It was the same professional skepticism she'd encountered countless times during her career, the automatic dismissal that came when established protocols were challenged by unconventional approaches. "Ryan," she said urgently, "can you put me on speakerphone? I need to talk to the paramedic." Ryan fumbled with his phone, his hands shaking as he activated the speaker function. "Please," he said to Morrison, "just listen to her for 1 minute. She's been helping Emma. Look at her color. It's better than when we started." Morrison glanced at Emma and had to admit the child didn't look as critical as he'd expected based on the emergency call. Her lips had a faint pink tinge rather than the blue he'd anticipated, and while she wasn't breathing independently, she didn't appear to be in complete cardiac arrest. "This is Dr. Sophia Chen," came the voice from the phone, clear and professional despite the speaker's tinny quality. "I'm a cardiac surgeon at Riverside Medical Center, and I've been providing remote guidance for this pediatric respiratory emergency." Morrison's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "A cardiac surgeon? Ma'am, with all due respect, this is a pediatric call, and you're not even here. We don't do remote consultations in emergency medicine. It's too dangerous and completely against protocol." "I understand your concern," Dr. Chen replied, her voice remaining calm despite the obvious frustration. "But I have extensive pediatric emergency training, and I've been assessing this child's condition for the past several minutes. Her presentation suggests respiratory depression rather than cardiac arrest, and the interventions I've guided have shown positive results." Sarah Valdez had begun her initial assessment of Emma, checking pulse, respiratory effort, and skin color. She looked up at Morrison with a puzzled expression. "Jake, her vitals aren't what I expected based on the call. Heart rate's weak but present, and she's got better perfusion than a typical respiratory arrest." "That's because she's been receiving appropriate supportive care," Dr. Chen's voice came through the speaker. "I've been guiding the father through positioning and airway management techniques specifically designed for this type of presentation." Morrison's frustration was evident as he turned toward the phone. "Doctor, I don't care what your credentials are or what hospital you work at. You cannot diagnose or treat a patient you haven't seen, especially not an infant in distress. That's not how emergency medicine works, and it's potentially dangerous." He'd seen this before. Doctors who thought their degrees meant they could handle any situation, regardless of their actual experience or the circumstances. Adult cardiac surgeons were brilliant in their own field, but pediatric emergencies required specialized knowledge and hands-on assessment that couldn't be provided through a phone conversation. "What you're describing is telephone medicine," Morrison continued, his tone growing more authoritative. "It's unreliable, it's inappropriate for emergency situations, and it puts patients at risk. We have protocols for a reason, and those protocols don't include taking directions from doctors who aren't present." Mrs. Patterson, who had been quietly observing from the corner, suddenly spoke up. "But she's helped," she said in her soft Irish accent. "I've been watching this whole time, and the baby's color got better after the doctor started talking to Ryan." Morrison dismissed her observation with a wave of his hand. "Ma'am, you're not trained to assess pediatric emergencies. Changes in skin color can be caused by lighting, positioning, or natural fluctuations that don't indicate improvement." Sarah Valdez, however, was looking more closely at Emma's presentation. As a paramedic with 12 years of experience, she'd responded to hundreds of pediatric calls, and something about this case wasn't fitting the typical pattern. The child's condition appeared more stable than the initial emergency call had suggested. "Dr. Chen," Sarah said, addressing the phone directly, "can you tell me specifically what interventions you've guided? I need to know what's been done before we proceed." Morrison shot his partner a sharp look. "Sarah, we don't take medical history from phone consultations. Our protocols are clear about this." But Sarah had noticed something Morrison had missed in his rush to establish professional authority. Emma's positioning was slightly unusual. Her head was tilted at a specific angle, her body arranged in a way that wasn't random. Someone with medical knowledge had clearly provided guidance about optimal positioning for airway management. "Jake," Sarah said quietly, "look at how she's positioned. That's not accidental. Someone who knows pediatric airway management has been giving instructions." Dr. Chen's voice came through the speaker again, professional and measured, despite the obvious tension. "I've guided positioning for optimal airway alignment and taught basic respiratory support techniques. The child has shown consistent improvement in perfusion and color response." Morrison's jaw tightened. He'd worked too many calls where well-meaning interference had complicated emergency care. Family members who tried to help based on internet research, neighbors who thought their first aid training made them qualified for serious emergencies, and now a doctor who thought she could treat patients through a telephone. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you one more time to end this call," Morrison said firmly. "We appreciate your concern, but we have a job to do, and we can't do it effectively with outside interference. Remote medical consultation during active emergencies isn't just inappropriate, it's potentially negligent." The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Ryan looked desperately between his phone and the paramedics, torn between the doctor who had been helping Emma and the professionals who were supposed to save her. Emma remained motionless in his arms, her fate hanging in the balance of a professional turf war she couldn't possibly understand. Through the phone speaker, Dr. Chen's voice cut through the tension with quiet authority. "Then I suggest you assess her current status very carefully, because the next few minutes are going to determine whether this child lives or dies." The standoff in Ryan's cramped apartment was broken by the smallest sound, a tiny, almost inaudible wheeze from Emma's lips. Sarah Valdez, who had been quietly conducting her assessment while Morrison argued with Dr. Chen, immediately focused all her attention on the sound. "Jake, stop talking and listen," Sarah commanded, her voice cutting through the tension. "She just made a respiratory sound." Morrison paused mid-sentence, his professional training overriding his frustration. Both paramedics leaned closer to Emma, straining to hear any indication of spontaneous breathing. The apartment fell silent except for the distant hum of traffic and Mrs. Patterson's quiet prayers. Then it came again, a soft, barely perceptible whisper of air movement. "There," Ryan whispered, his voice filled with desperate hope. "She's trying to breathe on her own." Dr. Chen's voice came through the phone speaker with renewed urgency. "Ryan, this is exactly what we've been working toward. Her respiratory system is beginning to respond. I need you to continue the positioning I taught you, but now we're going to add a gentle stimulation technique." Morrison looked at Sarah, who was checking Emma's pulse and respiratory effort with practiced efficiency. After 12 years as a paramedic, she knew the difference between wishful thinking and actual medical improvement. What she was seeing didn't match the typical presentation of a child in complete respiratory failure. "Her pulse is getting stronger," Sarah reported quietly. "Still bradycardic, but there's definitely improvement from what I'd expect based on the initial call." "Dr. Chen," Sarah addressed the phone directly, ignoring Morrison's disapproving look. "What specific positioning have you been using? I need to understand what's been done before we make any changes." Through the speaker, Dr. Chen's voice was clear and professional. "I've guided optimal head positioning for airway alignment. Slight extension with jaw thrust to maintain an open airway. The father has been providing gentle back support to optimize chest expansion. These are standard pediatric airway management techniques adapted for non-medical personnel." Morrison's expression shifted slightly. Those weren't random instructions. They were legitimate medical interventions, properly adapted for the circumstances. He'd seen badly positioned airways compromise breathing in countless pediatric cases, and proper positioning could indeed make the difference between life and death. "Ryan," Dr. Chen continued, "I want you to place 2 fingers on Emma's chest, just below her rib cage. Feel for the gentle rise and fall we've been encouraging. Can you detect any movement there?" Ryan's hands moved to Emma's tiny chest, his touch gentle but desperate. For a moment, nothing. Then, barely perceptible, he felt the slightest expansion beneath his fingertips. "Yes," he breathed, tears streaming down his face. "Yes, I can feel it. She's breathing. It's tiny, but she's breathing." Sarah quickly positioned her stethoscope over Emma's chest, listening intently to the sounds that would tell the real story of the infant's condition. What she heard made her look up at Morrison with surprise. "Jake, I'm getting air movement, shallow but present. Lung sounds are diminished but not absent." She paused, processing the implications. "This child isn't in complete respiratory failure. She's got spontaneous respiratory effort." Morrison moved closer, his skepticism warring with the evidence his partner was presenting. He took his own assessment, checking pulse, skin color, and respiratory signs. Emma's condition was indeed better than the emergency call had suggested. Not normal, but not the critical presentation he'd expected. "Dr. Chen," Morrison said, his tone grudgingly less dismissive, "if you've been guiding respiratory support, I need to know exactly what interventions have been used. We can't proceed without understanding what's already been done." Through the phone, Dr. Chen's relief was audible. "I've been using a modified approach based on pediatric basic life support protocols, adapted for remote guidance. Optimal positioning, gentle airway management, and respiratory stimulation techniques designed to encourage spontaneous breathing without requiring direct medical intervention." Sarah looked at Morrison meaningfully. These weren't the random instructions of an unqualified person. They were evidence-based medical interventions properly modified for the circumstances. Her 12 years of experience told her that whoever was on that phone knew exactly what they were doing. "The key breakthrough came when we identified that this wasn't cardiac arrest, but rather respiratory depression," Dr. Chen continued. "By focusing on airway management and breathing support rather than full resuscitation protocols, we've been able to encourage her natural respiratory drive to reassert itself." As if to prove the point, Emma made another soft sound, this time more clearly recognizable as an attempt at breathing. Her eyelids fluttered slightly, the first sign of neurological responsiveness they'd seen since the crisis began. Ryan sobbed with relief, his hand gently stroking Emma's forehead. "She's coming back," he whispered. "My baby's coming back." Mrs. Patterson crossed herself, her weathered hands clasped in gratitude. "Saints be praised," she murmured in her Irish accent. "The wee one's fighting her way back to us." Morrison was forced to confront a reality that challenged his 15 years of emergency medicine experience. The child he'd expected to find in full arrest was instead showing clear signs of improvement, guided by someone he'd dismissed as unqualified interference. His protocols and training told him remote consultation was inappropriate, but the evidence before him suggested otherwise. Sarah continued her assessment, documenting the improvements they were all witnessing. Respiratory rate is slow but present, approximately 6 to 8 breaths per minute. Pulse is strengthening. Skin color has improved markedly from the initial presentation. "Dr. Chen," Sarah said, addressing the phone with newfound respect, "what's our next step? She's clearly responding to whatever you've been doing." Dr. Chen's voice carried a mixture of professional confidence and emotional relief. "We need to continue supporting her breathing while her respiratory system fully engages. The techniques we've used have given her body the opportunity to restart its natural breathing pattern, but she's not out of danger yet." Morrison found himself in unfamiliar territory. His training and protocols clearly stated that telephone medicine was inappropriate for emergency situations, but the results were undeniable. Emma was breathing, responding, showing signs of recovery under the guidance of someone who wasn't even present. "Doctor," Morrison said, his tone more respectful than before, "I'll admit your guidance seems to have been effective, but we still need to transport this child for full evaluation and monitoring." "Absolutely," Dr. Chen agreed immediately. "She needs hospital assessment and continued monitoring. But the critical moment has passed. She's breathing spontaneously. Her color has improved, and she's showing neurological responsiveness. The emergency interventions have been successful." Emma chose that moment to open her eyes fully, looking up at her father with the confused but alert expression of a child waking from sleep. Her breathing, while still shallow, was now clearly visible as her tiny chest rose and fell in a regular pattern. Ryan laughed through his tears, gently lifting Emma to his chest. "Hello, sweetheart," he whispered. "Daddy's here. Everything's going to be okay." For the first time since entering the apartment, Morrison allowed himself to smile. Whatever his opinions about remote medical consultation, there was no denying the outcome. A child who had appeared to be dying was now breathing, alert, and responsive. The breakthrough had happened not in spite of the unconventional approach, but because of it. Word traveled through Maplewood Springs with the speed that only small-town news could achieve. By the time the ambulance pulled away from Ryan's apartment building with Emma breathing steadily in her father's arms, Marcus Thompson from apartment 2A was already on the phone with his sister Janet, who worked at Maplewood Elementary. Janet immediately called her friend Carla at the post office, who mentioned it to everyone who came in for their mail that evening. But this wasn't typical small-town gossip. This was something extraordinary. A baby's life had been saved by a doctor who wasn't even there, guiding a desperate father through a miracle over the phone. By Wednesday morning, 3 days after Emma's crisis, Ryan's phone began ringing with calls from strangers. The first was Patricia Hensley, a soft-spoken woman from Oakdale Drive whose voice trembled as she spoke. "Mr. Miller, my name is Patricia Hensley. I heard about what happened with your daughter, and I was wondering, do you still have that doctor's contact information?" Ryan, who was feeding Emma her morning bottle while monitoring her breathing like a hawk, was confused by the request. "I'm sorry, what do you need Dr. Chen for?" "It's my grandson Tyler," Patricia explained, her words rushing together. "He's 4 years old, and he has these episodes where he stops breathing for a few seconds. The doctors at regional hospitals say it's sleep apnea, but the equipment they want to use costs thousands of dollars, and our insurance won't cover it. I thought maybe this Dr. Chen could help us understand what to do when it happens." Ryan found himself explaining how Dr. Chen had saved Emma's life, and before he knew it, he was promising to ask the doctor if she'd be willing to talk to Patricia about Tyler's condition. The second call came from Maria Santos, whose 8-month-old son Diego had been born with minor heart defects that required constant monitoring. "The cardiologist in the city is wonderful," Maria explained, "but it's a 2-hour drive each way, and with 3 other kids, I can't get there as often as I should. If there's a heart doctor who does phone consultations." By Thursday, Ryan had received 7 more calls. Parents whose children had chronic conditions, elderly residents whose grandchildren lived far away but had medical concerns, even expectant mothers who wanted to know if Dr. Chen could provide guidance during emergencies when their regular doctors weren't available. Mrs. Patterson, who had become something of a celebrity in her church circle for witnessing Emma's rescue, was fielding calls of her own. "The whole parish is talking about it," she told Ryan as she helped him fold Emma's tiny clothes. "Father McKinnon wants to know if Dr. Chen would be willing to speak at our next community health meeting." The story had evolved with each telling, but the core remained consistent. A heart surgeon had saved a baby's life using nothing but her voice and a phone connection. In a town where medical resources were limited and the nearest pediatric specialist was 90 minutes away, that possibility represented hope for dozens of families. Sarah Valdez, the paramedic who had witnessed Dr. Chen's guidance firsthand, found herself defending the unconventional approach to her colleagues at the Maplewood Springs fire station. During their Thursday evening shift meeting, Captain Robert Hayes brought up the incident. "I heard Jake Morrison's been talking about some doctor who treated a baby over the phone," Hayes said, his tone skeptical. "That sounds like a liability nightmare waiting to happen." "Cap, I was there," Sarah responded firmly. "I saw the results. That baby went from apparent respiratory failure to breathing on her own because someone with the right knowledge was willing to help when we couldn't get there fast enough." "But phone consultations for emergencies?" Hayes shook his head. "There's got to be legal issues, protocol violations." "Maybe," Sarah admitted, "but that little girl is alive because someone was willing to break protocol. Sometimes the rules need to bend when lives are at stake." The conversation didn't end there. Other first responders in the county began discussing the case, sharing their own experiences with situations where remote guidance might have made a difference. Emergency dispatcher Linda Walsh mentioned the case during her shift briefing, noting that Dr. Chen's intervention had actually reduced emergency response time by providing immediate life-saving support. "If we had more doctors willing to provide emergency guidance while we're en route," Walsh suggested, "we might save more lives." By Friday, the story had reached Riverside Medical Center, where Dr. Chen worked. Nurses in the cardiac unit were whispering about their colleague's heroic phone call. And word eventually reached Dr. Patricia Williamson, the chief of cardiothoracic surgery. Dr. Williamson called Sophia into her office Friday afternoon, her expression unreadable. "I've been hearing interesting stories about one of my surgeons providing emergency medical care via telephone," she began. Sophia felt her stomach drop. She'd been expecting this conversation, dreading the potential consequences of her decision to help Ryan and Emma. "Dr. Williamson, I can explain." "Sophia, I'm not here to reprimand you," Dr. Williamson interrupted, her tone surprising. "I'm here because I've had 3 calls today from other hospitals asking about our remote emergency consultation program. Apparently word has gotten out that one of our doctors successfully guided a layperson through a pediatric emergency over the phone." The chief leaned back in her chair, studying Sophia with interest. "Dr. Martinez at Children's Hospital heard the story and wants to know if you'd be interested in developing protocols for emergency phone consultations. Dr. Lewis at Regional Hospital thinks we should consider offering remote guidance services for rural families." Sophia stared at her supervisor in shock. She'd expected disciplinary action, not professional interest in expanding her unconventional approach. "The liability issues would need to be worked out," Dr. Williamson continued, "and we'd need proper protocols, training, and documentation procedures. But if what you did can be systematized and made available to families who need it." She paused, considering the implications. "We could potentially save lives in situations where immediate medical care isn't available." That weekend, Ryan received a call that surprised him more than all the others combined. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the pediatrician at Maplewood Family Health Center, wanted to meet with him and Dr. Chen about establishing a formal emergency consultation service. "I've been practicing family medicine here for 15 years, Dr. Rodriguez explained during their phone conversation. "I've seen too many situations where children needed immediate help but couldn't get to appropriate care fast enough. If Dr. Chen's approach can be adapted for other emergency situations, it could serve our entire community." By Sunday evening, Ryan found himself in the unprecedented position of coordinating between Dr. Chen, local medical professionals, and a growing list of families who wanted access to emergency phone consultation services. Emma, now completely recovered and babbling happily in her high chair, had become the catalyst for something much larger than anyone had anticipated. The small town's response to one baby's crisis was transforming into a movement. Families who had felt isolated by limited medical resources suddenly saw hope for better emergency care. Medical professionals who had been constrained by traditional protocols began exploring new ways to serve their communities. Mrs. Patterson, watching Emma play with her colorful blocks while Ryan fielded another call from a concerned parent, shook her head in wonder. Who would have thought, she mused in her gentle Irish accent, that one wrong number could change so many lives? 2 weeks after Emma's miraculous recovery, Dr. Sophia Chen was settling into her evening routine when her personal phone rang at 11:47 p.m. The number wasn't one she recognized, but something compelled her to answer. On the other end, a man's voice cracked with panic. "Dr. Chen, this is David Martinez. I got your number from Ryan Miller. Please, I need your help. My daughter Isabella stopped breathing and the ambulance is stuck behind a massive accident on Highway 9. They said it could be 20 minutes before they reach us." Sophia's blood turned cold. Highway 9 was the main route into Maplewood Springs, and if emergency services were blocked, this family was completely isolated. Through the phone, she could hear a woman sobbing in the background and the unmistakable sound of someone attempting CPR. "David, how old is Isabella?" Sophia asked, already moving toward her home office where she kept her medical references. "She's 2 years old. She was sleeping, and then Maria found her like this, blue and not breathing. We called 911, but they're telling us the accident involves multiple vehicles. Dr. Chen, she's been down for almost 3 minutes." 3 minutes. In pediatric emergencies, every second counted exponentially. Brain damage could begin within 4 to 6 minutes without oxygen, and permanent damage was likely after 10 minutes. This wasn't just an emergency. It was a race against time with stakes that couldn't be higher. "David, is Maria the one performing CPR?" Sophia asked, hearing the rhythm of chest compressions through the phone. "Yes, she learned it when Isabella was born, but she's scared she's not doing it right." "Dr. Chen, what if we lose her?" Sophia closed her eyes, feeling the weight of Lily's memory pressing down on her. But this time was different. This time she had the knowledge, the experience, and the opportunity to prevent another family from experiencing the devastation that had shaped her entire life. "David, you're not going to lose her. I'm going to talk you both through this step by step. But I need you to put me on speakerphone and follow my instructions exactly." "Can you do that?" "Yes, anything. Please help us." As the phone switched to speaker, Sophia could hear Maria's panicked voice counting compressions in Spanish, her technique slightly off but her determination absolute. "Maria," Sophia called out, "this is Dr. Chen. I need you to stop compressions for just a moment and let me assess Isabella's condition through David's eyes." "Doctor, thank God," Maria sobbed. "I don't know if I'm doing this right. She's so little and I'm afraid I'm hurting her." "Maria, you're keeping her alive right now. You're doing exactly what she needs. But I'm going to help you do it even better." For the next several minutes, Sophia guided them through proper pediatric CPR technique, adjusting their hand positioning, compression depth, and rhythm based on Isabella's age and size. She could hear the improvements in their technique through the phone, could sense their growing confidence as they followed her precise instructions. "Now, after 30 compressions, I need you to check for any obstruction in her airway," Sophia instructed. "David, can you gently open her mouth and look inside?" "I see something," David said urgently. "There's something small and pink in the back of her throat." Sophia's heart rate spiked. Airway obstruction in a 2-year-old could be anything: food, a small toy, even pieces of torn tissue. But whatever it was, it needed to be removed immediately. "David, I need you to turn Isabella on her side, supporting her head and neck. We're going to use gravity to help clear whatever is blocking her airway." As David repositioned his daughter, Sophia walked them through a modified version of the Heimlich maneuver adapted for toddlers. Through the phone, she could hear their movements, could picture exactly what was happening based on the sounds and their descriptions. "It's not coming out," Maria cried. "Dr. Chen, what do we do?" Sophia made a split-second decision that went against every protocol she'd ever learned. "David, I need you to very carefully use your finger to sweep whatever is in her throat. This is dangerous if done wrong, but we don't have a choice. Make a hook with your pinky finger and gently sweep from the side of her mouth toward the center." The silence that followed was the longest of Sophia's life. Then, suddenly, she heard David gasp. "I got it! It's a piece of something pink. Maybe a balloon? It's out!" "Now back to CPR immediately," Sophia commanded. "Maria, 30 compressions, then David, 2 rescue breaths. I'll count with you." As they resumed CPR under her guidance, Sophia found herself praying for the first time since Lily's death. This family's crisis had become her own, their desperate fight for Isabella's life, intertwined with her own need for redemption. Then, through the phone speaker came the most beautiful sound Sophia had ever heard, a small, weak cough followed by a gasp. "She's breathing!" Maria screamed. "Isabella's breathing!" "Don't stop what you're doing yet," Sophia cautioned, though her own relief was overwhelming. "Keep monitoring her breathing and be ready to resume CPR if needed." "David, how does her color look?" "She's pink again. Her lips aren't blue anymore." "Dr. Chen, she's looking at us. She's awake." At that moment, Sophia heard the distant sound of sirens approaching. The ambulance had finally made it through the accident scene, but Isabella was already breathing on her own, alert and responsive thanks to the combined efforts of her parents and a doctor 20 miles away. Jake Morrison's voice came through clearly as the paramedics entered the Martinez home. "We're here now. What's the status?" "The baby was in respiratory arrest with airway obstruction," David explained rapidly. "Dr. Chen walked us through CPR and helped us clear the obstruction. Isabella's been breathing on her own for about 2 minutes now." Sophia heard Morrison's surprised voice. "Dr. Chen, the same Dr. Chen from the Miller case?" "Yes," Maria said firmly. "She saved our daughter's life over the phone while you were stuck in traffic." Through the speaker, Sophia could hear Morrison and his team conducting their assessment. Isabella's vital signs were stable, her breathing was regular, and her neurological responses were normal. The crisis was over, but the implications were just beginning. "Dr. Chen," Morrison's voice came through the phone, his tone completely different from their first encounter. "I owe you an apology. What you've done here, guiding 2 parents through successful pediatric resuscitation over the phone, it's beyond anything I thought was possible." Sarah Valdez's voice joined the conversation. "Doctor, we've got a healthy, responsive 2-year-old who should have suffered brain damage or died based on the circumstances. Instead, she's trying to talk to her parents and asking for her stuffed animal." The ultimate test had been passed. Not only had Dr. Chen's remote guidance worked again, but it had worked under the most challenging circumstances possible, with parents who had never performed CPR before, during a complex emergency involving airway obstruction, and with professional help delayed by circumstances beyond anyone's control. As the ambulance prepared to transport Isabella for hospital evaluation, David Martinez spoke into the phone one last time. "Dr. Chen, I don't know how to thank you. You gave us our daughter back." Sophia sat in her home office, tears streaming down her face, finally understanding that Lily's death hadn't been meaningless. Every moment of guilt, every sleepless night studying pediatric emergencies, every technique she'd learned had led to this moment, to saving Isabella's life, and proving that sometimes the most important medical interventions happen not in hospitals, but wherever families need help the most. The emergency department at Riverside Medical Center was bustling with its usual controlled chaos when Dr. Margaret Torres arrived for her Monday morning shift. As the head of emergency medicine, she'd heard whispers about one of the cardiac surgeons providing phone consultations for pediatric emergencies, but she'd assumed it was typical hospital gossip blown out of proportion. That assumption ended when Jake Morrison walked into her office at 7:30 a.m., carrying a thick folder of incident reports and wearing an expression she'd never seen in their 15 years of working together. "Dr. Torres, we need to talk about remote emergency consultation," Morrison began without preamble. "I've just documented 2 cases where Dr. Sophia Chen from cardiothoracic surgery successfully guided untrained civilians through complex pediatric emergencies over the phone." Dr. Torres looked up from her morning coffee, intrigued despite her skepticism. Morrison was known for his by-the-book approach to emergency medicine, not for endorsing unconventional procedures. "Jake, you know my position on telephone medicine. It's problematic from both liability and efficacy standpoints. What could possibly have changed your mind?" Morrison opened his folder, spreading out detailed incident reports, timeline documentation, and follow-up medical assessments. "Dr. Torres, in 30 years of emergency medicine, I've never seen anything like this. We're not talking about basic first aid guidance. We're talking about successful pediatric resuscitation, airway obstruction clearance, and respiratory crisis management, all conducted by parents with no medical training, guided entirely by voice instructions. The first case file detailed Emma Miller's respiratory emergency. Morrison had documented every aspect of Dr. Chen's guidance, the measurable improvements in the child's condition, and the successful outcome. But it was the second case that made Dr. Torres sit forward in her chair. Isabella Martinez was clinically dead for over 3 minutes, Morrison explained, his voice carrying professional awe. Respiratory arrest with complete airway obstruction. Highway 9 was blocked by a multi-vehicle accident, so we couldn't reach them. Dr. Chen guided the parents through CPR, taught them to perform an emergency airway clearance procedure, and successfully resuscitated a 2-year-old over the phone. Dr. Torres studied the medical documentation carefully. Isabella's hospital admission records showed normal neurological function, no signs of hypoxic brain injury, and complete recovery. The timeline indicated she should have suffered permanent brain damage, yet she'd been discharged 24 hours later with no complications. "This is extraordinary," Dr. Torres admitted, "but Jake, you understand the legal implications of what you're describing? A surgeon providing emergency care outside her specialty to patients she's never examined, using techniques that aren't standardized for remote application?" "That's exactly why I'm here," Morrison replied. "Dr. Torres, what if we could systematize this? What if we could train doctors to provide emergency phone guidance using proper protocols and documentation? We could potentially save lives in situations where traditional emergency response isn't fast enough." Before Dr. Torres could respond, her phone rang. The caller ID showed Dr. Elena Rodriguez from Maplewood Family Health Center. "Dr. Torres? I hope you don't mind me calling directly, but I've been hearing remarkable things about emergency phone consultations being provided by one of your doctors. I'm wondering if Riverside might be interested in establishing a formal remote guidance program for our rural communities." Dr. Torres activated her speakerphone so Morrison could hear the conversation. "Dr. Rodriguez, I'm actually meeting about this exact topic right now. What's prompted your interest?" "Frankly, it's the results I'm seeing," Dr. Rodriguez replied. "I've examined both children who received Dr. Chen's remote guidance, and their outcomes are nothing short of miraculous. More importantly, I've spoken with families throughout our region who are desperate for this kind of emergency support. The nearest pediatric specialist is 90 minutes away, and we lose precious time in critical situations." After ending the call, Dr. Torres found herself facing a decision that could reshape emergency medicine protocols. Everything in her traditional training argued against remote consultation, but the documented results were impossible to ignore. "Jake, I want you to set up a meeting with Dr. Chen, Dr. Williamson from cardiothoracic surgery, and our legal team. If we're going to explore this, we need to do it properly." The meeting took place 2 days later in the hospital's main conference room. Dr. Chen arrived with detailed documentation of her interventions, research supporting remote emergency guidance, and a proposal that surprised everyone present. "I've spent the last week reviewing literature on telemedicine applications in emergency care," Dr. Chen began, her voice steady despite the career-defining nature of the discussion. "While remote diagnosis has limitations, remote guidance for emergency interventions has shown significant success in military applications, disaster response, and rural medicine." She distributed copies of peer-reviewed studies showing successful outcomes when trained medical personnel guided civilians through emergency procedures. The research supported what she'd accomplished intuitively with Emma and Isabella. "The key difference," Dr. Chen continued, "is that I'm not attempting to diagnose conditions I can't see. I'm providing real-time guidance for life-saving interventions to bridge the gap until professional help arrives." Dr. Sarah Kim from the hospital's legal department had been quietly reviewing the documentation throughout the presentation. "Dr. Chen, from a liability standpoint, this is unprecedented. But your documentation is exceptional, your outcomes are remarkable, and you've identified a genuine gap in emergency care coverage." The breakthrough came when Dr. Williamson, who had been silently observing the discussion, spoke up. "I've been in contact with colleagues at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia and Johns Hopkins. Both institutions are interested in collaborating on developing formal protocols for remote emergency guidance. Dr. Chen, they want you to lead a multi-hospital research initiative." Dr. Torres felt the weight of the moment settling over the room. They weren't just discussing an unusual case anymore. They were potentially pioneering a new approach to emergency medicine that could save lives across the country. "Dr. Chen," Dr. Torres said carefully, "if we move forward with this, it won't be as an informal phone consultation service. It would need to be a fully documented, protocol-driven program with proper training, certification, and oversight." "That's exactly what I'm proposing," Dr. Chen replied. Formal training programs for doctors in remote guidance techniques, standardized protocols for different emergency scenarios, and comprehensive documentation requirements. We could create a model that other hospitals could replicate. Morrison pulled out additional documentation he'd been holding in reserve. Dr. Torres, I've been in contact with other paramedic services in the region. Everyone wants access to this capability. The State Emergency Medical Services Director has requested a meeting to discuss statewide implementation. The room fell silent as everyone processed the implications. What had started as an accidental phone call to save one baby's life was evolving into a potential revolution in emergency medical care. Dr. Kim looked up from her legal review. I need to run this through extensive legal analysis, but preliminary assessments suggest this could be structured to meet liability requirements while serving a genuine medical need. Dr. Williamson nodded approvingly. The research possibilities alone are extraordinary. We could be documenting the first systematic approach to remote emergency guidance in civilian medicine. Dr. Torres made the decision that would change everything. Dr. Chen, I'm authorizing a pilot program, formal protocols, proper training, comprehensive documentation, and full legal review. If this works the way your cases suggest it could, we might be saving lives that would otherwise be lost to timing and distance. As the meeting concluded, Dr. Chen realized that her accidental encounter with Ryan Miller's desperate phone call had become something far beyond what she'd ever imagined. 2 children's lives had been saved, but more importantly, a new approach to emergency medicine was being born, one that could help families across the country when seconds mattered and help was too far away. 6 months after Emma Miller's crisis, the conference room at Riverside Medical Center had been transformed into mission control for what had become known as the Emergency Remote Guidance Initiative. Dr. Sophia Chen stood before a wall of monitors, displaying real-time data from 12 participating hospitals across 3 states, each implementing the standardized protocols she'd developed from those first desperate phone calls. The transformation had been remarkable. What began as 2 accidental emergency interventions had evolved into a comprehensive medical program with formal training curricula, standardized response protocols, and documentation systems that were being studied by emergency medicine departments worldwide. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the newly appointed director of the National Institute for Emergency Medicine Innovation, had arrived that morning to conduct the 6-month program evaluation. Her preliminary findings would determine whether the initiative received federal funding for nationwide expansion. Dr. Chen, Dr. Martinez began, reviewing the comprehensive data package spread across the conference table. The numbers we're seeing are unprecedented in emergency medicine research. Can you walk me through the systematic changes you've implemented since the pilot program began? Sophia moved to the main display screen, which showed a detailed flowchart of the emergency remote guidance protocol she'd developed. We've created 3 distinct intervention pathways based on emergency type and severity, she explained. Respiratory emergencies, cardiac events, and trauma situations each have specialized protocols that can be administered by trained physicians through voice guidance alone. The first pathway displayed detailed decision trees for respiratory emergencies like Emma's case. Every possible scenario had been mapped out with specific instructions, timing requirements, and success indicators that remote guidance physicians could use to assess progress without direct patient observation. The respiratory protocol has been successfully deployed in 47 cases across our network, Sophia continued. Average time from initial contact to stable breathing has decreased from 12 minutes with traditional emergency response to 4 minutes with immediate remote guidance. Dr. Martinez examined the cardiac emergency pathway, which had been developed following Isabella Martinez's successful resuscitation. This cardiac protocol appears significantly more complex. How do you ensure civilian safety when guiding untrained individuals through CPR and airway management? Dr. Michael Thompson, the emergency medicine physician who had joined Sophia's team after the pilot program's success, stepped forward to answer. We've implemented a 3-tier safety system, he explained. First, all remote guidance physicians complete a 40-hour certification program specific to voice-only instruction techniques. Second, every call is simultaneously recorded and monitored by a secondary physician for quality control. Third, we maintain real-time coordination with local emergency services to ensure professional backup is always en route. The monitoring system had been Dr. Chen's innovation, born from her experience with Emma and Isabella. She'd realized that remote guidance was most effective when it complemented, rather than replace traditional emergency response. The system ensured that every remote guidance call was logged with emergency dispatch, creating seamless coordination between phone guidance and professional medical response. The results speak for themselves, Dr. Thompson continued, pulling up outcome statistics on the main screen. We've documented successful interventions in 89% of cases where remote guidance was provided before emergency services arrived. More significantly, we've seen a 63% reduction in preventable complications in pediatric emergencies. Dr. Martinez reviewed the training documentation that had been developed for the program. The curriculum was comprehensive, covering everything from voice communication techniques to legal documentation requirements. Each participating physician had to demonstrate proficiency in guiding mock emergency scenarios before being certified for actual remote guidance calls. The training program has been adopted by medical schools at 15 universities, Sophia noted. We're seeing fourth-year medical students incorporating remote guidance techniques into their emergency medicine rotations. It's becoming a standard skill set rather than an experimental approach. The legal framework had been equally revolutionary. Working with hospital legal departments and state medical boards, the team had developed comprehensive liability protections for physicians providing remote guidance. The key breakthrough had been classifying remote guidance as emergency stabilization rather than formal medical treatment, which allowed for broader physician participation while maintaining appropriate oversight. Dr. Sarah Kim, who had become the legal specialist for the program, joined the presentation via video conference from the state medical board offices. We've successfully implemented remote guidance protections in 12 states, with federal legislation pending to create nationwide standards. The legal precedent established here could revolutionize how emergency medicine is practiced in underserved areas. The technology infrastructure had evolved far beyond simple phone calls. The program now utilized secure medical communication platforms that allowed for real-time vital sign monitoring, video guidance when appropriate, and automatic documentation of all interventions. Families in participating regions could access emergency guidance through a dedicated hotline that automatically connected them with certified physicians. We're processing an average of 43 remote guidance calls per week across the network, Dr. Thompson reported. Response time from initial call to physician connection has been reduced to under 90 seconds. Most importantly, we're reaching families who previously had no access to immediate medical guidance during emergencies. The research component had attracted international attention. Medical journals were documenting the program's outcomes, and emergency medicine conferences worldwide were featuring presentations about remote guidance protocols. The World Health Organization had expressed interest in adapting the system for use in developing countries where medical resources were severely limited. Dr. Martinez reviewed the cost-effectiveness analysis that had been crucial for securing continued funding. These numbers are remarkable, she admitted. Average cost per successful intervention is 67% lower than traditional emergency response, while outcomes are measurably better. That's unusual in healthcare innovation. The success had created unexpected challenges. Demand for remote guidance services was growing faster than the program could train certified physicians. Sophia had found herself coordinating with medical schools to integrate remote guidance training into standard curricula, ensuring a pipeline of qualified physicians to meet increasing demand. The most significant impact has been on rural and underserved communities, Sophia explained, displaying a geographic analysis of program utilization. Families living more than 30 minutes from emergency services account for 68% of our successful interventions. We're literally saving lives that would have been lost to distance and timing. Ryan Miller had become an unofficial spokesperson for the program, sharing Emma's story at medical conferences and community health meetings. His experience had helped other families understand that remote guidance wasn't experimental medicine. It was a proven bridge between crisis and professional care. What began as one father's desperate phone call has become a new standard of care, Dr. Martinez observed, reviewing the comprehensive program documentation. Dr. Chen, you've not only saved individual lives, you've created a systematic approach that could transform emergency medicine globally. The 6-month evaluation concluded with federal approval for nationwide expansion. The Emergency Remote Guidance Initiative would receive $12 million in funding to establish programs in all 50 states, train 500 additional physicians, and develop advanced technology platforms for even more effective remote intervention. As the meeting concluded, Sophia looked at the wall of monitors showing real-time emergency guidance calls in progress across the network. Somewhere in those calls, another desperate parent was receiving the help their child needed, guided by physicians who understood that sometimes the most important medical interventions happened not in hospitals, but wherever families needed help most urgently. 1 year after that fateful wrong number, the groundbreaking ceremony for the Lily Chen Emergency Response Center took place on a crisp October morning in Maplewood Springs. Dr. Sophia Chen stood beside the construction site, holding a photograph of her sister while watching bulldozers break ground for what would become the first dedicated remote emergency guidance facility in the United States. The center, named in honor of the 8-month-old sister whose death had unknowingly prepared Sophia to save countless other children, represented the culmination of everything the Emergency Remote Guidance Initiative had achieved. But more than that, it symbolized the transformation of personal tragedy into generational hope. "Sophia, your sister would be so proud," her mother Lin Chen said softly, placing a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. For the first time in 18 years, Lin's voice carried joy rather than grief when speaking about Lily. The family had traveled from Oregon specifically for this ceremony, finally ready to celebrate their youngest daughter's memory rather than mourn her loss. The Lily Chen Emergency Response Center would serve as the national headquarters for remote guidance services, housing the most advanced medical communication technology available and training the next generation of emergency guidance physicians. But its most important feature would be the Memorial Garden, where families whose children had been saved through remote guidance could leave tokens of gratitude and hope. Ryan Miller stood nearby with Emma, now a vibrant 15-month-old who babbled constantly and showed no signs of the respiratory crisis that had nearly claimed her life. Emma had become the unofficial mascot of the remote guidance program, her healthy development serving as living proof of what could be achieved when medical innovation met desperate need. "Dr. Chen," Ryan said, approaching with Emma in his arms, "I wanted Emma to be here for this. None of this would exist if you hadn't answered that wrong number. And someday I want her to understand that her life helped save thousands of other children." Emma reached towards Sophia with chubby hands, babbling in the nonsensical but enthusiastic language of toddlers. Sophia took her gently, marveling at how different this moment felt from her sterile hospital interactions. This wasn't just a patient. This was the child whose crisis had unlocked Sophia's true calling. The ceremony included representatives from medical institutions across the country, government officials who had supported the program's expansion, and families whose children had been saved through remote guidance. Isabella Martinez, now a healthy 3-year-old, played quietly with other children whose lives had been touched by the program. Dr. Patricia Williamson, who had supported Sophia's unconventional approach from the beginning, served as the ceremony's keynote speaker. "The Lily Chen Emergency Response Center represents more than medical innovation," she told the gathered crowd. "It represents the power of transforming personal pain into purpose, of turning tragedy into triumph for countless families we may never meet." The center's design reflected its mission. The main building would house 12 emergency guidance stations, each equipped with advanced communication technology, real-time monitoring capabilities, and direct connections to emergency services nationwide. But the facility was designed to feel welcoming rather than clinical, with comfortable spaces for families and children who visited for training or support. The training facility would become the gold standard for emergency guidance education. Medical students, residents, and practicing physicians would come from around the world to learn the techniques Sophia had developed from those first desperate phone calls. The curriculum would include not just medical protocols, but the communication skills needed to guide panicked parents through life-saving procedures with only voice instruction. Mrs. Patterson, now 82 but still sharp as ever, had been given a place of honor at the ceremony. The elderly woman who had witnessed Emma's crisis firsthand had become an advocate for the program, sharing her story at community meetings and church gatherings throughout the region. "I've seen miracles in my 8 decades, Mrs. Patterson told the crowd, her Irish accent lending weight to her words, but nothing quite like watching a father save his daughter's life with guidance from a doctor he'd never met. This center will ensure that other families have the same chance at miracles." The memorial aspect of the center was particularly meaningful to Sophia. The memorial garden would include a small chapel for reflection, walking paths lined with donated flowers, and a central fountain dedicated to children lost to emergencies that couldn't be prevented. But it would also celebrate the children who had been saved, with a special section dedicated to successful remote guidance interventions. Jake Morrison, whose transformation from skeptic to advocate had been complete, would lead the center's emergency services coordination program. His experience bridging traditional emergency response with innovative remote guidance made him the ideal person to ensure seamless integration between the center's services and existing emergency medical systems. Bail slit. When I first heard about telephone medicine, I thought it was dangerous and irresponsible, Morrison admitted during his remarks. Now I can't imagine emergency medicine without it. This center will train emergency responders nationwide to work collaboratively with remote guidance physicians, creating a seamless safety net for families in crisis. The research component of the center would be overseen by Dr. Rebecca Martinez, who had left her position with the National Institute for Emergency Medicine Innovation to lead the center's clinical research division. The facility would house the largest database of remote emergency guidance cases in the world, providing invaluable research data to improve techniques and expand applications. We're not just building a building, Dr. Martinez explained to visiting medical journalists. We're creating a living laboratory where the next generation of emergency medicine innovations will be developed, tested, and shared with the global medical community. The international implications were already becoming apparent. The World Health Organization had committed to funding similar centers in developing countries, where remote guidance could serve populations with limited access to traditional emergency services. The techniques developed in Maplewood Springs would soon be saving lives in rural Africa, remote regions of Asia, and underserved communities worldwide. The center would also house the Ryan Miller Family Support Program, providing resources, counseling, and community connections for families whose children had experienced medical emergencies. Ryan had insisted that the program focus not just on the medical aspects of pediatric emergencies, but on the emotional support families needed to recover from trauma. When Emma stopped breathing, I felt completely alone, Ryan had explained during the planning process. This program will ensure that no parent ever has to face a medical crisis feeling isolated and helpless. The ceremony concluded with the planting of a small oak tree in the memorial garden, with soil contributed by families from every state where remote guidance had saved a child's life. The tree would grow alongside the center, becoming a living symbol of how individual acts of courage and compassion could flourish into something that touched thousands of lives. As the crowd dispersed and construction workers returned to their tasks, Sophia remained at the site holding Emma and standing beside the memorial dedicated to Lily. For the first time since her sister's death, Sophia felt that the cosmic scales had been balanced. Lily's death hadn't been meaningless. It had been the foundation upon which this center, this program, and these saved lives had been built. The Lily Chen Emergency Response Center would officially open its doors in 6 months, but its impact was already being felt. Medical students were changing their specialty focus to include emergency guidance training. Hospitals worldwide were implementing remote guidance protocols. Most importantly, families everywhere were gaining access to life-saving help when traditional emergency services couldn't reach them fast enough. Emma babbled happily in Sophia's arms, oblivious to the fact that her survival had sparked a revolution in emergency medicine. But someday, when she was old enough to understand, Emma would learn that sometimes the most important legacies are built not from success, but from the determination to ensure that others never experience the same devastating loss. 5 years after that desperate wrong number changed everything, Dr. Sophia Chen stood at the podium of the International Conference on Emergency Medicine Innovation in Geneva, Switzerland. Before her sat an audience of 3,000 medical professionals from 96 countries, all gathered to learn about the remote guidance protocols that had revolutionized emergency care worldwide. Behind her, a massive screen displayed a world map dotted with thousands of lights, each representing a life saved through remote emergency guidance. The numbers were staggering. Over 40,000 successful interventions across 6 continents, with success rates that had exceeded every projection the medical community had dared to make. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sophia began, her voice steady and confident in a way that would have been impossible during those early days of uncertainty. 5 years ago, I received a phone call that taught me the most important lesson of my medical career. Sometimes the most powerful healing happens not when we follow established protocols, but when we have the courage to respond to human need with whatever tools we have available. In the audience, Ryan Miller sat with Emma, now a bright 6-year-old who had insisted on coming to, quote, "Daddy's important meeting." Emma didn't fully understand the significance of the conference, but she knew that the woman on stage was the doctor who had helped save her life when she was a baby. More importantly, she knew that her own story had somehow helped other children around the world. The transformation we've witnessed isn't just about medical innovation, Sophia continued, clicking to a slide showing children from dozens of countries who had been saved through remote guidance. It's about recognizing that expertise has value regardless of where it's located, that help can come from unexpected sources, and that human connection can transcend physical distance when lives are at stake. The presentation included video testimonials from families across the globe. A mother in rural Kenya, whose newborn had been saved by guidance from a pediatric cardiologist in London. A father in remote Alaska who had performed emergency CPR on his teenage son with instruction from a physician in Boston. A grandmother in rural India who had cleared her granddaughter's airway obstruction with guidance from a doctor in Mumbai, transmitted through a basic smartphone connection. Each story reinforced the same fundamental truth. When traditional medical systems couldn't reach families fast enough, remote guidance had bridged the gap between crisis and care. What we've learned, Sophia explained, is that parents and caregivers are capable of far more than we ever imagined when they're properly guided and motivated by love for their children. The program's success isn't just about medical knowledge. It's about trusting in the extraordinary things ordinary people can accomplish when they're given the right support at the right moment. The statistical impact was remarkable, but the human stories were what truly captured the audience's attention. The conference featured presentations from parents who had performed complex medical procedures with only voice guidance, children who were thriving years after remote guidance interventions, and medical professionals who had completely changed their approach to emergency care after witnessing the program's effectiveness. Dr. Margaret Torres, now the director of the Global Emergency Guidance Initiative, presented the program's expansion statistics. We currently operate guidance centers in 47 countries with certified physicians providing services in 31 languages. Response time from emergency call to physician connection averages 42 seconds globally, and our success rate for pediatric emergencies remains above 90%. But the numbers, impressive as they were, only told part of the story. The real transformation had been cultural, a shift in how the medical community thought about expertise, accessibility, and the role of technology in saving lives. Jake Morrison, who had become the international coordinator for emergency services integration, addressed the conference via video link from the Sophia Chen Emergency Response Center. 5 years ago, I thought remote medical consultation was dangerous and irresponsible, he admitted. Today, I can't imagine emergency response without it. We've learned that the most effective emergency care often happens when traditional responders and remote guidance physicians work together as a seamless team. The program had evolved far beyond its original scope. Medical schools worldwide now required remote guidance training as part of their emergency medicine curricula. The technology had advanced to include real-time biometric monitoring, augmented reality guidance systems, and artificial intelligence that could help physicians make rapid assessments based on audio and video input. Perhaps most importantly, the success of remote emergency guidance had inspired similar innovations in other medical fields. Remote surgical guidance was helping doctors in underserved areas perform complex procedures. Maternal health programs were using similar techniques to support births in areas without qualified midwives. Mental health crisis intervention was being revolutionized by immediate access to qualified counselors through secure communication platforms. The lesson here extends far beyond medicine, Sophia told the international audience. In every field, in every community, there are people with knowledge and expertise who could help solve critical problems if we could just connect them with those who need help. The technology exists, the knowledge exists. What we needed was the willingness to think differently about how help can be delivered. Emma, sitting in the audience with her father, raised her small hand during the question period. The moderator, charmed by the child's enthusiasm, recognized her. Dr. Chen, Emma said in her clear 6-year-old voice, "My daddy says you saved my life when I was a baby. Does that mean I can help save other babies when I grow up?" The audience fell silent, touched by the child's innocent but profound question. Sophia smiled, remembering the pale, motionless infant she had helped guide back to life through a phone connection. "Emma," Sophia replied, her voice thick with emotion, "you're already helping save other babies. Your story gives hope to families around the world. And yes, when you grow up, you can help save lives in ways we haven't even imagined yet. That's what happens when one person's crisis becomes everyone's opportunity to do better. As the conference concluded, Sophia reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. It had begun with tragedy, Lily's death, and the guilt that had shaped 18 years of her life. It had continued with crisis, Ryan's desperate phone call and Emma's fight for life. But it had culminated in transformation, not just for the families they'd helped, but for emergency medicine itself. The wrong number that had connected a panicked father with a guilt-ridden surgeon had become a right connection that had changed the world. It proved that sometimes the most important innovations don't come from research laboratories or medical conferences, but from ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances with nothing but their determination to help. What started as one father's desperate phone call has become a global movement, Sophia concluded her presentation. It reminds us that in our interconnected world, help is always closer than we think. Expertise can reach across any distance, and the most powerful medical intervention is often simply having someone who cares enough to try. As delegates from around the world made plans to implement remote guidance programs in their own countries, Ryan Miller held his healthy, vibrant daughter close, knowing that Emma's life had not only been saved by an accidental phone call, but it helped save thousands of other children around the world. Sometimes the most profound changes in human history begin with the simplest acts of compassion, a wrong number answered by someone willing to help, a crisis that becomes a catalyst for innovation, and the understanding that when we connect human need with human expertise, miracles become not just possible but inevitable. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.